I want to do is show you a short video that I want you to think of in terms of the video of the Confucian ceremony that we watched last time, right? So I want you to think back to that Confucian ceremony and what that looked like, and compare it to this Taoist ceremony. What elements here are different? Maybe I should turn the sound on. Casey.
Number one, was he hitting the gong with a bone?
Yes.
Okay.
And what might that indicate about Taoism, given what we heard about from our presentation group? What is Taoism more interested in? Human relationships with other people or human relationships with nature? Yeah, so natural objects are often preferred in ceremonies to artificial objects. So hitting the gong with a bone would be an example, right? You're using a natural object to accomplish it. Yeah, Corey?
It's just like really unorganized and really chaotic.
Okay, yeah, compared to the very, very precise, intricately choreographed Confucian ritual, right? Yeah, this is very casual comparatively, right? I mean, you see the priest underneath his robes, he's just wearing slacks and a pair of black shoes, right? Everybody's dressed down. What sorts of things could you see going on in the background?
People are just walking around.
Yeah, people are just walking around, like, somebody leaves an offering on the altar, right? There are a couple of guys just sort of taking down equipment, right? Everything, seems to be a lot more casual. Even like, Chris, what were you going to say?
I was just saying the red rhythm the majority of the time is awful. They were not in sync with each other at all.
Okay, yeah, the two guys playing the clarinets in particular, right, they're not really all that worried clearly about listening to each other. It's like they learned the part by rote, and they're just sort of playing it by rote, right? And I think that also that lends to that sort of very sort of comparatively casual nature here of the ceremony. This isn't the same sort of big, formal, elevated ritual that we saw in the Confucian temple. This is much more casual. Yes?
Something else, in the Confucius ritual, everybody was wearing traditional wear. And
Yeah.
You just had the one person, but also his traditional wear was a whole lot brighter. You saw more brighter colors.
Okay.
Where in the Confucius it was very, like, muted.
Yeah, it's much more clear here, one, who the priest is, right? Because he's the only one wearing any kind of ritual garb. But, as we also notice, right underneath that ritual garb, he's clearly just wearing ordinary Western clothes, as is everyone else around him. And in fact, you might have seen like one of the musicians that's hitting one of the gongs or wood blocks is smoking a cigarette off to the side, right?
Could they just be practicing for like a bigger thing?
No, this is not practice. What this was like, this is a ceremony that's performed during what's called Ghost Month. And while ancestor worship is a much bigger part of Confucianism than Taoism, it's still a part of Taoism. Right? One thing to note about the three major Chinese religions, right? Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And I think we might have discussed this in relation to Confucianism, but none of them actually require a God concept. This doesn't mean that there are practicing Buddhists, Taoists, and Confucians who do worship a god or gods, but that's something that's not necessarily natural to the religion itself. Right? What we're looking at in these three religions is more a kind of way of being in the world, right? A way of practicing life, which for a Confucian is social at its basis, right? It's social and it's constructed and it takes work. It takes constant work to keep the universe running. You have to constantly work at your social relationships and constantly work at educating and bettering yourself. For a Taoist, you don't maintain balance. You don't maintain the universe by cultivating your social relationships and by moving yourself up the social ladder. You cultivate the universe mostly by cultivating potential within the self. Now, this is not like, I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Ayn Rand? Okay, yeah, this is not like fountainhead bullshit, it's like, this is not like, I am the great striver and, how dare these tiny peons ignore me and I should be allowed to do whatever the hell I want. It's not like that. What it is about is living in harmony with your surroundings. So your surroundings are actually important, right? Your environment is important, other people are important, but your position relative to them is not. Right? Your social position is not important. Your level of education is not important. In fact, I think as our presentation group noted, the Daodejing seems to regard excessive education as a negative, excessive knowledge as a kind of negative, in part because it kind of upsets the balance between people, and it's something that some people can use to gain advantage over others. So let's dig into the text here a little bit and see where we can get with it. Does anybody have a chapter they'd like to start with? Anything that particularly puzzled or interested you? Yeah, Sarah.
I've noticed through a couple of chapters, they kept talking about the sage. I don't know what
Okay.
that meant, like, what
Okay.
was so big about it, because, like, I kind of...
Okay. Can you point to an example?
Chapter 2.
Okay.
Therefore the sage keeps the dead, that consists of taking no action and practices the teaching that uses no words.
Okay, so when he talks about the sage, he's talking about something similar to, but not quite the same as, what Confucius meant by a junzi, right? Now, what did junzi mean for Confucius? What's a junzi? A gentleman, yes. And how do you get to be a junzi? Yep. Through study, through ritual behavior, right? Through reciprocating the honors and favors shown to you, right? Through practice and participation in the great ritual of life, right? The sage in Taoism does not become so the same way a junzi does, right? The sage in Taoism, right, the kind of ideal Taoist person, gives up desire, gives up striving, largely gives up action. Empties the mind of desire, empties the mind of knowledge. Now there's a problem here in terms of practice. If you want to be a junzi, right, you have to consciously pursue it, right? You have to consciously work towards it, to decide this is your goal and do everything you can to get there. If you want to be a Taoist sage, though, what was your first mistake? Wanting to be a Taoist sage, exactly, yes. If you make a conscious decision to follow the way, you have already fucked up. Right? You've already done it wrong. You can't decide you're going to be a Taoist. You can't decide you're going to follow the way. You do it naturally or not at all. And I get that this is a hard concept to try to grasp, right? It's like, how can you have a religion or a philosophy that you can't consciously follow? Yeah, Corey.
So we follow more like Confucius, like I'm going to school to be a nurse, so
Mhm.
that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, Confucianism is probably more easily grasped and more congenial to contemporary Western culture. Because, I mean, Confucianism deals with, there are certain things about Confucianism that don't really gel well with Western culture. For example, its tendency towards excessive respect for authority structures, and that everyone should know their place within the group. But the idea of striving towards a particular goal and the possibility of social advancement, yeah, those are very much Confucian ideas. A Taoist shouldn't want those things. A Taoist shouldn't care, but should actually disdain those things, ideally. So does that answer your question about the sage a little bit, at least? Yeah, I think we sort of dovetailed off of that a bit, but yeah, the sage is the Taoist equivalent of the junzi. It's just you can't actually be one by trying to be one. All right. Other passages you guys want to talk about? Other questions you have? Yeah, Ashley.
The beginning of chapter 2, the whole world recognizes the beautiful as the beautiful.
Uh-huh.
This is only the ugly. The whole world recognizes the good as the good, yet this is only the bad.
Uh-huh.
Like you're not supposed to recognize good or bad. You're not supposed to recognize beauty or ugliness. It's just how it is. So that was kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, part of what this second poem is about, on the one hand, the harmonizing of opposites. Right, keep in mind that symbol, the yin-yang symbol, right, that Darpan was talking about towards the end of their presentation. One thing that he noted that you should note as well, right, is that both sides of the yin-yang, right, the white side and the black side, each have some element of the other within it. So you cannot have the ugly without the beautiful. Right? These things cannot exist apart from each other. So inside every beautiful thing there is also an ugliness. Inside every ugly thing there is also a beauty. Now the other thing that's going on here, the Daodejing is constantly attacking conventional morality. It is constantly attacking the habits, particularly of the cultivated upper classes. There are a couple of reasons for this. One of these is our group talked about the fact that we don't know if there was any such person as Laozi, right? We know that Confucius was a real historical person, even though the Analects, the major work attributed to him, was probably compiled long after his death, without his direct involvement. Laozi is more likely to have been a mythical figure. The origins of Taoism probably lie in Chinese folk religion. And so Taoism has a much closer relationship to sort of older peasant religious practices than Confucianism does, right? Confucianism, with its respect for hierarchy and for authority, tends to be a much more kind of elite-focused philosophy. Right? Even if you're not of the elite yet, you can get there. Taoism is really more a philosophy for people who are trying not to get crushed by a powerful elite. And I think it would be a good idea to then sort of revisit a little bit the historical period in which this book takes shape. Right, so they mentioned the Warring States period, right? This was an era sort of roughly 475 to 221 BCE. Right, now we recall when Confucius wrote the Analects, what was the basic state of the Zhao dynasty in China?
It was still like there, but they were kind of fragmented and spread out, and they each had like their own little leaders.
Yeah, there was a king, right? There was at least an idea of a unified nation, but in practice, each little state ran itself. And you could see that China as an empire was fraying and pulling apart, right? So what he's trying to do is, through an emphasis on social relationships and respect for legitimate authority, right, pull back together a kingdom that is falling apart. Now, this period, right, referred to as the Warring States period, right, the period in which the Daodejing in its present form emerges, society's already gone to shit, right? Everything has already fallen apart. There's nothing left to salvage. Right? The Zhao dynasty is no more. It's extinct. And what you have are a bunch of smaller states with their own armies and their own ambitions, jockeying for advantage, each one trying to take over the others, or at the very least, defend itself from its more aggressive neighbors. So what we've got here in this period, really, is anarchy. And the strategy for survival that the Daodejing proposes is much more suited to a period of anarchy than a period of social decay, right? The idea in the Daodejing, right, is not to be like the big, strong, rigid tree that can get pushed over. It's to be like the weak, supple, bendable branch that when something tramples over it can get back up again. Right? So it elevates passivity into a virtue because for ordinary people, being passive is what is going to help you survive when elites go to war against each other. Which is not to say that there isn't advice for elites in here as well, but yeah, this is the historical context in which this is occurring, right? Okay, so now, as far as the whole conventional morality thing goes, just sort of to get back to that, right? There are two schools we find Laozi sort of constantly arguing against. One is the Confucians. The other is a group called the legalists. Now, the legalists were 3rd century BCE philosophical school.
Taoism is against Confucianism.
Taoism is, yeah, against Confucianism and against legalism. Now, what the legalists argued was that there should be no private personal definitions of what constitutes good and evil behavior, right? That what is good is that which follows the law of the land. What is evil is that which breaks the law of the land, right? Order is good, disorder is bad. Following the rules is good, breaking the rules is bad. And that lawbreakers should be punished to the full extent of the law. Taoists, on the other hand, see the law as a human construction that is often out of harmony with the way. In fact, if we look at poem 38 on page 1352, the one that starts with the man of the highest virtue. Can I get a volunteer to start reading that? All right, yeah, Corey, go for it.
A man of the highest virtue does not keep the virtue, and that is why he has virtue. A man of the lowest virtue never strays from the virtue, and that is why he is without virtue. The former never acts, yet leaves nothing undone. The latter acts, but there are things left undone. A man of the highest benevolence acts, but for no ulterior motive. A man of his highest rectitude acts, but from ulterior motive. A man most
Conversant.
In the rights acts, but when no one responds, rolls up his sleeves and resorts to persuasion by force.
Okay, you can stop there. So,
Our time reading.
so what the poem is doing here is setting up a kind of hierarchy, right? With virtue, right? Sort of natural excellence or goodness at the top, right? Followed by, right, benevolence, kindness towards others. So we could sort of, translate into, to the Confucian terms you understand, like virtue would be day, benevolence, ren, rectitude, right? Ethics, righteous behavior, following the rules, and rights, right? Back to Li. That ritual is simple ritual behavior, right? Doing behavior you've learned by rote. So virtue is the best of these things. Rights, the least of these things.
What did you say virtue was for the Taoists?
Virtue is sort of your more well. It doesn't quite mean the same thing for Taoists that it does for Confucians, but for Confucians, that's the definition we're dealing with right now. It is sort of your the moral excellence that you cultivate through your social relationships. Taoism is a slightly different concept of day that we'll get to in a minute. But this particular poem, this particular verse, is talking about Confucian values. Now, can you continue, Corey, and start with hence when the way was lost?
Hence, when the way was lost, there was virtue. When virtue was lost, there was benevolence. When benevolence was lost, there was rectitude. When rectitude was lost, there were the rights. The rights are the wearing thin of loyalty and good faith, and the beginning of disorder. For knowledge is the flowery embellishment of the way, and the beginning of folly. Hence the man of large mind abides in the thick, not in the thin, in the fruit, not in the flower. Therefore he discards the one and takes the other.
Okay, so if these things exist in the world, if we have benevolence, if we have rectitude, if we have rights, if we have virtue, is this an indication that all is well in the world? Yeah, if the world still has the way, right? We don't need this shit. We don't need these other things. All of these other things are lesser substitutes for the way. And they only appear when the world has stopped following the way. They're only necessary when the world has stopped following the way. Because all of these things involve action. All of these things involve actually, doing something, rather than cultivating stillness, right? I think, did you guys provide the Chinese word for inaction in your presentation? I'll do it now in case you didn't. I can't remember off the top of my head. Wu wei, yes. Yes, wu wei means inaction. So, how does one practice Wu Wei? Can you get any sense of how you would do this from these poems?
By not doing.
By not doing?
Just don't do anything.
It's not quite that simple.
I imagine the way the Taoists intend work is to act. I think I read an explanation that's basically said to act without thought or act without a conscious desire to do something. So just, I want to say follow your nature, but I'm fairly certain that's not right, because following your nature can lead to actual action.
Yeah, following your nature is not quite the thing to do. Following nature would be more the kind of thing you would do. But yeah, I think what you were saying, it's a little bit similar to Krishna's directions to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So, act, but do so without desire, and do so when necessary. By and large, if you've set up the world in the right kind of way, if you're a ruler, you never have to act, right? The best kind of ruler in a Taoist system is one who doesn't actually need to do anything.
Because nature doing it already.
Exactly, yeah. You just let nature perform its action, take its course. To give you an example here, let's see. Page 1350, poem 19. Can I get a volunteer to read this? Exterminate the sage.
Exterminate the sage, discard the wise, and the people will benefit 100-fold. Exterminate benevolence, discard rectitude, and the people will again be filial. Exterminate ingenuity, discard profit, and there will be no more thieves and bandits. These three, being false adornments, are not enough, and the people must have something to which they can attach themselves. Exhibit the unadorned and embrace the uncarved flock. Have little thought of self and as few desires as possible.
Okay, so in what way is this good advice for a ruler from a Taoist perspective? Why would you exterminate the sage and discard the wise?
We would have conflict over who's right, whose answer is better than the other.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to know about these sages, these wise men, right, is that there were hundreds, thousands of them traveling around China in this period, right? Each of them offering conflicting advice to rulers who would pay them. Right? Confucius was one such of these traveling wise men, right? We talked last time about the Shi, right? These men of skill. They were itinerant scholars and generals who would go and offer advice to rulers for pay, right? They're doing it to benefit their own pockets and to advance themselves socially. Right? Exterminate benevolence, discard rectitude, and the people will again be filial. Right? If you stop making people have to behave in particular deferential ways towards other people, they'll do it naturally, right? If you stop insisting, for example, that people bow to the king in a particular position at a particular time of day, right? Then they'll just do it out of respect. Exterminate ingenuity, discard profit, and there will be no more thieves and bandits, right? If there's nothing to steal, if there's nothing to fight over, if everybody simply has enough, then there will be no crime, there will be no thieves and bandits. Right? So what the Taoist advice to a ruler seems to be is to eliminate possible causes of dissension among the people, right? If the people have nothing to fight over, then they will simply follow their natures, will follow nature itself, and everything will run harmoniously. Yeah,
That was kind of like the quote I had read. It was like where he was telling people to be like water.
Yeah.
And they just flow, like how water flows in cracks and everything. It can just go anywhere. It can be into anywhere.
Yeah, and it always flows in the same direction, right? There's another passage where he talks about, making sure you keep your wheels in the same rut every time, right? Don't forge, don't waste your energy forging new paths, right? Follow the old well-trodden ways, and you can cultivate your own internal power, right? This is really what Dai means for a Taoist, right? Dai is a kind of internal power that you cultivate through inaction. So to give you an example of how this works, there's a lot of stuff here about the usefulness of emptiness. Right? I think you talked a little bit about this in the presentation, Daodejing. Can we look at poem 11 on page 1348? Can I get a volunteer to read this? Yeah, Darpan.
Thrice spokes say one heart. Add up the nothing therein to the purpose in hand, and you have the use of the heart. Need clay in order to make a vessel. Add up the nothing therein to the purpose in hand, and you have the use of the vessel. Cut out doors and windows in order to make a room. Add up the nothing therein to the purpose in hand, and you have the use of the room. Thus, what we gain is something, yet it is by virtue of nothing that this can be put to use.
Thank you. So yes, if you're trying to build a house, right? It's no good to try to live in a solid stone block, right? You have to empty out. You need empty space in the middle of the structure in order to live, right? In order for a wheel to work, right? A solid wheel is not going to work as well as one that is, spokes coming from a hub, right? The empty space makes the wheel stronger. You can't use a jug that is already full of something else. Right? So the idea is to empty yourself, to fill yourself with potential. This is one of the things that you'll often see in Taoist literature, the womb used as a kind of image for this. Right? When they talk about the mysterious female, the mysterious feminine, one of the reasons why Taoism tends to favor the feminine principle over the masculine is precisely because of the womb as an empty space for the growth and development of potential humans, right? It's something that is, naturally empty, but in which something new and powerful can grow. And this is the point of trying to empty your mind, trying to, numb your senses, right? All of this. It's about developing and taking advantage of your potential, right? The whole thing about the uncarved block is the same thing, right? It doesn't matter so much what the block is going to be. What matters more is what it can be. So if you are like the uncarved block, right, there are still possibilities for you. It's not yet determined what you are going to be. Does this make sense? Is everybody getting this? Everybody following? Okay. So what questions do we still have a few minutes? What questions do you guys still have about this? Yeah, Ashlyn.
The 5 colors make man's eyes blind, the 5 notes make his ears deaf, the 5
Yes.
tastes injure his palate.
Uh-huh.
What are the 5 colors? What are the 5 notes? What are the 5 tastes?
5 is just sort of a formulaic number in a lot of Chinese literature, poetry, iconography. Actually, number 5 is particularly important in Taoism because there are sort of 5 Chinese elements. I think it's fire, earth, air, metal, and wood. It doesn't. Yeah, it's not like the 4 Western elements. There's, I think there might be one that I screwed. I know metal and wood are in there.
Fire, air, metal, wood.
I think so. Yeah, and what a Taoist alchemist. Taoists were actually very much involved in the practice of various kinds of magic and alchemy. Was primarily interested in how these elemental forces acted upon each other. But what this is actually is, the 5 colors make man's eyes blind, the 5 notes make his ears deaf, the 5 tastes injure his palate. What this is actually warning against generally is indulging in aesthetic excess, right? Indulging in sensory excess. So, don't eat really rich, really spicy food, right? Eat bland, nourishing food. Don't admire gaudy works of art. Admire things that are simple. Don't take riding and hunting as your pleasures. Right. Essentially, what this particular verse is talking about is just simplifying everything in your life and sticking to the essentials for survival. Right? Don't worry about all of this extra fancy shit. You don't need it. It's just going to distract you. If you want to follow the way, you have to push it all to the side. Pardon?
It's just going to distract you from your more horrible life.
Yeah. You should embrace that peasant life. Yeah, what are you going to say?
For some reason, like when I read 5,
Uh-huh.
it like stuck with me. I don't know why, but it's
Okay.
kind of where it says, heaven, earth, and
Okay. Heaven and earth are ruthless and treat the myriad creatures as straw dogs. The sage is ruthless and treats the people as straw dogs. Okay, and everybody read the footnote and knows what straw dogs are, right? They're used in rituals. They're set up and revered at the beginning of the ritual, and at the end they're stomped on and burned, and it's a sort of proxy for an actual animal sacrifice, right? So, heaven and earth treat the people as straw dogs. They treat the myriad creatures as straw dogs. What does that mean? Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Because Taoism focuses on nature and shows that humanity has lost touch with nature and the relationship is strained between the animals and creatures of the earth with humans.
Well, I think what it more comes down to is the way nature treats us, right? Does nature actually give two shits about you?
No.
It does not, right? Nature is going to do what nature does.
Well, basically, they're sacrifices.
Yeah. Right? Nature is going to do what it's going to do, and we just have to put up with it. Right? Some days we're going to be on top of the world, right? Some days it's going to seem like the heavens favor us. On other days, it's going to seem like everything's coming down on us. So what we need to do is think about the space between heaven and earth and how it is like a bellows. And what's the important thing here about a bellows? Why is the bellows being used as an analogy here? Does everybody know what a bellows is?
Isn't that the thing before?
Yeah, it's sort of, you'll see like a blacksmith at a forge, right? You know, he's got this great big thing that he pumps, right? It's sort of like the middle of an accordion, this great big air, but like he pulls it open, it inflates, pushes it down, and it pushes air out.
He said it's empty without being exhausted, which means it's empty, but it can keep being used.
Exactly, yeah. There's never anything in a bellows but air, right? So it's one of these things, that it's empty space that can be filled with power, then expelled and refilled again, right? Rather like a human being following the way, living in accordance with nature, can accumulate day, but never exhaust it, right? Provided you are acting in accordance, or not acting in accordance with the idea of Wu Wei. All right. Have I damaged all of your heads thoroughly yet? Are we all feeling our brains dented? Okay, so next time we're going to be looking at an early Christian autobiography. This is Augustine of Hippo's Confessions. Of course, you know, we're only looking at excerpts from it because it is very, very long. Apparently he had a lot to confess. Is this working? Yes, good.